This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show.
Welcome, everybody. Clay Ferraro here, Ira Winderman there, and Sean Stanley keeping us on the air. Thank you so much, Sean. Guys, we'd like to keep this your show as well, not just ours. And Ira Winderman's so excited about that. He's like dancing back and forth as we see right there.
It's real. It's real. It's finally happening.
It's real, and it's spectacular.
You and I started the show, back, in August we were talking and getting going on the show, and it's been week upon week upon week about what could be, might, and everything. And now we get to see it on the court, like we told Big O before we started the Pallet Rack City Inside the Paint show today. And you finally get to take measure because you know what it's like. I mean, speculation is fine. But Clay, matter of fact, I'm going to put the ball in your court to start here. So, you've won. You won the toss. You got possession. You won the opening tip. I got an undersized center. I couldn't win the tip. Are you certain about this season? Matter of fact, in other words, if you were to ask me from like 1 to 10, am I confident or certain either way? I would put myself at a 5. Do you feel strongly either way that, hey, I'm Clay Ferraro, God damn it, and this team is going to the Eastern Conference Finals, or I really don't want to get into the play-in? Sort of where are you as far as whatever your opinion is, and we'll discuss that over this next hour. How strong are you that you think you know what the Heat will be?
I'm a 10 that they won't be in the play-in. I'm really confident that they're, and you know what? Let me backtrack on that as I start to dance myself. Put me at a 9 just because you can't predict injuries. And I mean, we saw it last night.
Sure.
Drew Holiday had to leave with a heel injury. And MRI was clean on him. My guess is he would sit out the game in Milwaukee. I don't think you want to push it, or the game in Miami.
I would think so too, 2 days later, yeah.
But, I mean, it just kind of reinforces that, you never know what's going to happen with injuries. So put me at a 9 instead of a 10, but if this team stays healthy, I'm a 10 that they're not going to be in the play-in. Relatively healthy. As far as are they going to be an Eastern Conference Finals team, I'm not going that far just yet. I will say this. I watched that game last night, the Milwaukee-Brooklyn game, and you start to see where this Brooklyn thing may not be what they want it to be for 2 reasons. Number one is the obvious one, the Kyrie Irving situation, and we don't know how that one's going to play out. I think I underestimated how much of an impact the rules changes are going to have on James Harden's game. And he's still a very, very good player, potentially a great player. But I think the thing that made him elite is he was probably the best at the NBA at drawing fouls on some of those unnatural movements.
Yes.
And so the transitional period between who he was and who he's going to need to be in this new NBA might take some time. So, look, Kevin Durant is still arguably the best player in the NBA, certainly the best scorer. And yet, I think that around him, there are enough questions to where I could see the Heat being the team that potentially challenges the Bucks. So put me at a 5 there, but a 9 as far as avoiding the play.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's really interesting, Clay, because the way the schedule started, the 2 teams that everyone is predicting ahead of the Heat in the East, pretty much, I think we'd agree. Everyone, you talk about your playoff tiers, and people pretty much have Milwaukee and Brooklyn at tier 1, and then the Heat and some other group of teams, mostly, not everyone, in tier 2 as well. Milwaukee is a team. They are from 1 through 8, 1 through 9. God bless you. PJ Tucker just posted a story at sunsentinel.com about his disappointment of not being back. But the rest of the rotation is back from last season. Even with Grayson Allen, some other moves they've augmented. They were a really good team. There's no way you and I can sit here and parse things about the Bucks we don't like, because they can play slow, they can play fast, they can play big, they can play small. They have wing scorers in a league when you need wing scorers. And you know what? We could talk all day about Giannis doesn't have a jumper, Giannis at the foul line. Believe me, they got through that problem just fine last season. They'll be able to get through that again this season. But Brooklyn, you're right about for several reasons. Obviously, the rule changes. Does Harden get to the line 75 times a game or not? But here's the other part of it. The Kyrie thing is important not only for Kyrie Irving not being there, but Clay, you know this because you lived through this reality and you're reporting on Local 10. It's like when the Heat didn't have Chris Bosh. Not only don't you have the player, but you also have 20 to 30 million of unusable cap space. Take any sport. Take the Dolphins if they had 20 to 30 million dollars of dead cash on their cap. You're not the same team. That's what Kyrie is. If the NBA would have given the Nets relief and said, okay, even sign a mid-level player, and they could have brought someone else in there, even Wesley Matthews, James Ennis, for example, a reasonably good name, it would make them that much better. But they're not only playing with one of their leading men, they're playing in this huge salary cap void of not having replacement funds either. So the Nets are a little interesting that it could get sideways. And for all that Steve Nash says, I'm not talking about Kyrie anymore. You know this, Clay, as a reporter. You're still going to show up at practice and ask about him, ask players about him, and monitor this situation. The Kyrie Irving situation does not disappear just because Steve Nash is not talking about it. And you know what? With every loss, it becomes more prominently played, just like with every 76ers loss, Ben Simmons becomes more prominently played. So that's the thing. When you and I talk about where we think the Heat might finish, what their record might be, there's so much else going on in the conference that we have to figure out also. We have to figure Kyrie. We have to figure Ben Simmons. We have to get a look at these new remastered teams. Is Boston better, worse, or the same with Horford and Schroeder coming in, but Kemba Walker and Fournier going out? I don't know. I guess I'll see a little bit tonight against the Knicks. Can the Knicks become a better team with Walker and Fournier? Or all of a sudden is Julius Randle not as featured as a player? I don't know. There are so many question marks in the East, including with the Heat, that we need to get a read. And like Pat Riley said yesterday, maybe we all sit back, take a deep breath, Ira, wait 20 games, then we'll know what we need to do. I think that's reasonable. I think we still need to see what the Eastern Conference is all about.
And we're going to get into what Pat Riley said. We have a lot to get to today. It's amazing. You mentioned this last week, but it's like, we spend the first few shows kind of trying to find stuff to fill. Now there's so much we're kind of picking and choosing. Right. So we're going to talk about what Pat Riley had to say yesterday. I want to talk about these first few games for the Heat. And I think we want to make this kind of a recurring theme on this show where we look ahead to all of the games that are coming up during the week. And, not necessarily putting a W or an L next to them, but kind of going through the matchups and how we might see them play out. Get some of your questions, your comments here. Good morning to Thomas. Thank you very much. Roddy, the play-in has become a blessing and a curse for fans. You're happy that your team's in the playoffs, but watching those games is stressful. Yeah, it's really fun when your team is not involved. Because I remember that Warriors-Lakers game last year.
Yes.
That was like the game of the year. That was incredible. And it was a lot of fun to watch. Mike, hopefully the Heat will be a nice distraction from the Dolphins. That's why we're here every Wednesday morning, is to hopefully give you a distraction from
and that's also why Clay prominently displays his Panthers jersey. Matter of fact, I believe by next week that Clay's Panthers jersey will be on top of the Dolphins jersey, and he'll try to pretend he doesn't even have a Dolphins jersey. So keep an eye behind Clay for those watching us on the YouTube channel.
What you can't see is that the Heat jersey is covering an Inter Miami jersey, which is appropriate right now.
Yeah, I watched the game the other day. Literally turned it on for 5 minutes before halftime. Inter Miami, 2 goals against them. Okay, I'm done. Change the channel.
And then
another story, another day.
16-1 in their last. Like, how does that even happen? So okay, let's get to the Pat Riley comments from yesterday, and we mentioned this in the crossover. And I joked that it's clear that Pat Riley has been watching our show, but maybe it's not a joke. Maybe he does stand up just because he wants to listen to Ira Winderman.
Hi, Pat.
But he said, we're a contender. And something, Ira, that you've kind of made this distinction between being a challenger versus being a contender. And I think challenger status is, if everything goes right, then maybe you can put a scare into one of those teams, right? Your top 2 teams in the Eastern Conference. Contender means like you're right there. And as long as, health stays relatively okay, that you're right there in that conversation. And I think with what we saw from Brooklyn last night, this is not a one game, we're going to overreact to it. But I think when you start to see how this thing is going to play out in the Kyrie Irving situation, if you're putting yourself legitimately in the top 2 to 3 in the Eastern Conference and you feel like you could potentially be better than a Brooklyn team if these things don't play out, I think you have to call yourself a contender.
See, I'm going to disagree for this reason, Clay. If I were to give you a betting proposition, even money on this proposition, you can either take the Nets and the Bucks on one side of your bet to win the East, or every other team, and I give you 13 other teams to win the East, I am sure if it's an even money bet, which it wouldn't be, it'd be plus, whatever amount or minus whatever amount, you would take the Nets and the Bucks combo to win the East over the rest of the field. So I think that they, at least for now, have created the perception of separation for now. So the way I look at it is the Heat still has to earn their way into the group. Again, I'm probably a little higher than some are on the Celtics. But when I see Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum in a scoring league when they're healthy, what they can do. Remember, Tatum last season had that COVID bout. It was never quite the same. Brown was out for the playoffs even that last week of the season, those 2 big games against the Heat. So I first want to see if the Heat are there with Boston, let alone if they're there with the Nets or the Bucks. So I need to see a little more. I don't know this mix. I don't know. Kyle Lowry might want to play fast, and Jimmy Butler might want to say, like you said this week, I want to hide in the corner a little bit. I can't exhaust myself through an 82-game season. I need to see a little bit more. I think contender is perfect for Pat Riley to say. You should say that. It's your team. You wear the team's colors. You work for the team. I get the inside story, but I need to see a little more from beyond. Unlike, say, with the Panthers. There's not a single team in the Eastern Conference I look at with the Panthers. God bless Tampa Bay and what they did last year in the playoffs, or Ovechkin and what he can do with Washington. I get all of that, but I see them within everyone. I don't see that yet with the Heat. I need to be sold a little bit more.
So let me flip that question around then. Let's take the Nets out. And if I gave you Bucks and Heat versus the rest of the field, then would you take the field?
If you gave me Bucks and Heat on the rest of the field, I would take any group that has the Bucks.
And see, I
think the Bucks. I think the Bucks are the best team in the East. Now, I don't know tomorrow what happens at FTX Arena, especially if Drew Holiday, because of his injury, doesn't play. Road games are a little bit different. The Heat will have the home crowd. Finally have that. Amid all the COVID stuff, a real home crowd feeling. But I just look at the Bucks and I just say to myself, now, granted. I was going to tell you just now that they could be without any single player and be fine. But Giannis is such a difference maker that if Giannis wasn't playing, then I would change my perception there. So certainly they are a Giannis injury away from coming back down to the field. Last year was no fluke. Drew Holiday was the perfect pickup for that team on the eve of the season. Chris Middleton has always been highly underrated. But the problem was he was playing as the number 1, and there was no 1A wing scorer. Now he has someone else there. They have found a way how to use Brook Lopez and their height a little bit more. They're going to get Dante DiVincenzo back, soon enough. Bobby Portis back soon enough. I think they're the elite. I think they're the team I'm chasing. So when everyone says, oh, you don't want to be the Heat and finish, and have to play the Nets or the Bucks, in the first round or even the second round, my whole thought is, and especially after last year, avoid the Bucks. Anyone else I can deal with. Like we said, the Nets have so many issues. Do they have the defense? Do they have the depth? That I think Milwaukee is the clear target team in the East. At least that's my perception.
Yeah, and so that's why when you ask the question, if I would take the Bucks and the Nets versus the rest of the field, it's more because of the Bucks.
Yes,
and it's
and I
so
agree with that.
So some of the comments here, Thomas, I think the Heat will compete with the Celtics and Hawks for the 3rd seed in the East, and as long as and look, I think that's fine. And you and I have said this before. As long as they avoid the play-in, I really couldn't care less. I'd like to see them get the 3 or the 4 to have home court in the first round, but and especially the 3, because then we're assuming the Bucks are the 1 and the best team, so you avoid them in the semifinals. Chris, the Heat are definitely the last line of defense for us 305 fans. Yeah, for sure. So I want to point out something that you said though about the Bucks. They can afford to miss any one player, and you mentioned Giannis.
Right.
I still feel like Drew Holiday is not as important as Giannis. I'm not going to go quite that far, but I think he's
a glue player. Yes.
I think he's irreplaceable. And I think if they were to lose Drew Holiday, I would put him in the category of they can't afford to lose him and be okay.
Yeah, he's their wing defender also, and that's important.
Yes.
Chris Middleton tries. Giannis will attempt to guard everyone, but then you're taking him out of his natural space, being closer to the basket, being a shot alterer, being a rebounder. So I agree also. So they're pretty much set. Again, you have to be whole. You take someone away, like we're talking about Kyrie, it does change the dynamic. You take Jimmy away from the Heat, or Bam away from the Heat, or Kyle away from the Heat. Same thing, Clay. You're not the same team. But again, it's finish line. It's not starting line. Will the Heat get to the playoffs healthy?
Yes.
Will the Heat get to the playoffs rested? Same thing with the Nets. hey, if Kyrie's back the last 6 weeks of the season, if New York changes its mandate, that's fine. Those guys are veterans, Clay. It's not like you're trying to work in a new player who's learning how to play with those guys. The Nets will be fine with the final 6 weeks of Kyrie. And as much as you and I show up here every week at 9 o'clock on Wednesdays on Pallet Rock City Inside the Paint, we all know the regular season is just the means to get to the playoffs. The finish line is so much more important. But of course, there's the curiosity factor and the seeding factor.
So we're talking a lot about the Bucks, and a big reason why is because they're the best team in the Eastern Conference, but also it's the first game for the Miami Heat. And Pat Riley had some comments on that yesterday, and I thought it was really interesting. So we're going to get more into Pat Riley's comments and use that as a jumping off point into the opening of the season for the Miami Heat. That's coming up next right here on Inside the Paint. Welcome back to Inside the Paint. We're going to talk a little bit about Pat Riley and what he had to say yesterday. And I already joked in the first segment that he was looking directly at you when he said that this team is a contender because he knows your feelings on that subject. But something that I thought was really interesting that he mentioned, it kind of made me remember something that Eric Spoelstra said last season, beginning of last season. He said that Bucks loss, the getting swept by the Bucks in the Eastern Conference playoffs, left a really bad taste in their mouths. And he said they did a really good job against Jimmy Butler, had a really good plan against him, but Jimmy's the type of guy that's going to come back stronger and all of that. I remember back when the Heat blasted the Bucks in the bubble in the playoffs, and then the Bucks came to Miami regular season and absolutely annihilated
47. The second largest loss in franchise history. 47. The worst home loss ever.
And one of the first things that Spo said was that the Bucks looked like a team that had been thinking about that game for 3 months.
Yes.
I have a feeling that the Heat have been thinking about this game coming up on Thursday night for a couple of months now. And I thought it was interesting, Ira. I know these are professionals and they don't need any sort of extra motivation. But when I'm watching the Bucks ring ceremony last night and they're showing the rings and there's that 4-0 on there, 4-0. I'm sure you saw the rings and it had 4-0, I think 4-3 because they beat Brooklyn. It had every single series and how many games that it took for them to win. And that 4-0, the sweep is just jumping out at you. You know that Pat Riley and Eric Spoelstra saw that, and you know that that's the type of thing that they're going to use to energize this team as if they needed any extra motivation heading into tomorrow night.
It's interesting because I wrote a story in the Sun Sentinel about that, and I try to pull as many players as I could. Bam Adebayo was honest. He says, look, it doesn't matter who we were opening against. We're coming off a 4-0 first-round playoff sweep. If we're not angrier coming into the season, whether we were opening against the Magic or the Hornets or the Kings, we should be a team that wants to make retribution against anyone. So I think that's important. All the other players downplayed it because, again, I think they want to make it more about them than make it about the opponent. And I get that, Clay, totally. But I do think it matters to the psyche that if the Heat go out and lay an egg, then all of a sudden we talked the whole first segment here on Inside the Paint about the Bucks being the team you're targeting. And if you all of a sudden on October 21st already have doubts that you can't beat the elite team in the conference, I don't know how you undo that. They go in about a month or so to Milwaukee. They'll have their chance. It's a back-to-back. I think it's Indiana and Milwaukee in early December. So they'll have a chance to maybe overcome that to a degree. But yeah, they need to also clear their own heads. Now, the difference, Clay, is this, is that right now, 2 members of the Heat starting lineup and 3 players of their top 8 in the rotation weren't with the team last season, when you're counting Markieff Morris, PJ Tucker, and Kyle Lowry. So they might not have the same motivation. But this team better just have a sort of chip on the shoulder motivation all season because that's who they are. This team likely will not have a top 10, maybe even not top 15 NBA scorer this season, the way they're built for balance. This team might have a bunch of all-stars and yet might not have any all-NBA player. So it has to be everyone. There has to be a good opening game from Jimmy Butler, from Kyle Lowry, from Bam Adebayo, and down the roster to see who we are. But if there's not a level of passion at the start here, then I would be concerned. Then we will be talking next week on Inside the Paint. Did Eric Spoelstra overwork them in the preseason? Are their minds not in the right place? Is this not the right mix? I know it's only 1 of 82. And the one thing I've learned over the years, this is not the NFL, 1 of 16, now 1 of 17. Don't overreact to any single game. And if they should lose, I'm sure Eric Spoelstra will say that. But this to me, and I think, you were leading me into this, is more than just one of 82.
Absolutely. And because you want to look back at what happened last year and you talk about the psyche, I thought it was really important when you look at the trajectory of the Bucs season last year that they came in and blasted the Heat. They had to get that out of their heads. And
yes,
they did.
And they lost the next night to the Heat. They played one of those baseball-type series. The very next night they came back, the Heat had sat out Andre Iguodala the first day. They had everyone back the second. They made things normal, but the statement was made. And that's what I'm trying to say, Clay. You won't have another chance to make your Milwaukee statement until December. Just like when you play the Nets, next week, you're playing them because it's in Brooklyn without Kyrie Irving, so you can't make the definitive against their big three statement. So this is more than just a season opener. This is more than just your first time playing in a game where the building is called FTX Arena during the regular season. This is a chance to sort of set a tone a little in the East. Just like tonight, national TV, we have the Celtics and the Knicks. I don't know which team is better, but one of those teams in their head can come out of the game and go, hey, I can compete with the Knicks. I can compete with the Celtics. So I do agree it is more than one of 82. And yet I bet you when I'm done with this segment and I head down to practice and I try to ask Eric Spoelstra, is this more than 182? Nah. It's a long season. You can't look at it that way. We just want to grow and get better. That's what I'm going to hear. And I'm not going to write that.
Yeah, the coach speak stuff doesn't make Ask Ira. Tony says, Clay, how are the Bucs a clear favorite when they barely advanced against an injured Brooklyn Nets team last year? Because I don't know that this Brooklyn team is going to be any less depleted this year. To me, there are so many fewer questions about the Bucs than there are about any team. With Brooklyn, the Kyrie Irving situation, we don't know if he's going to be able to play in Brooklyn all year. We don't know when that mandate is going to be lifted, if it is.
Yeah, and Clay, I'm going to give you a Heat example here on the Bucs. When you win a championship, one of two things can happen. You gain your footing and your confidence. You remember the big three Heat. They went out against Dallas the first year, 2011. They were humbled, humiliated. They came back, won the 2012 title, got the Ray Allen shot to win in 2013, and at least made it to the finals in 2014. They found their footing and their confidence. But you also can go to the 2006 Miami Heat with Shaq and with Dwayne and Antoine Walker and Jason Williams and James Posey. They came back the next season and, oh my God, they were still sweating alcohol. They looked terrible. And that team and that group never came together again. So you want to see where the Bucs are. I think the Bucs, because they got enough young, proven, level-headed, non-Antoine Walker kind of players, that I think that adds a swagger to the Bucs. That adds a confidence to them. All the doubts of Milwaukee 50 years and not winning since, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was still Lou Alcindor, that franchise gained its footing. And once you let a franchise gain its footing and become a player, I think that tends to move you forward a little bit more. So I think the Bucs are better, even with a similar roster, because I think the Bucs have championship confidence. That's what Eric Spoelstra told us the other day.
Yeah, and the only good thing about that Miami Heat next season was opening night. We got the Alonzo Mourning, the famous GIF now, where he
when they lost like about 40 to the Bulls and Joakim Noah and Luol Deng and that whole team, that was not a fun night. That was not a fun season. That was not a fun series against the Bulls to end that season.
And why I think the Bucs go that direction is it's never been about talent with the Bucs. It's been, look, Giannis is somebody who's immensely talented. He busts his tail. Nobody works harder than Giannis Antetokounmpo. And yet I think there was always this thing where maybe he was a little too nice. Maybe there was, and I think there was a question as to whether or not he had that killer instinct.
Edge.
But the second that you win one, then you prove to yourself that you've got that edge. And I think
because this is a league where one's not enough, because you have to be like the Spurs, like the big three Heat. Like that's why the big three Celtics sort of got forgotten so quickly, because they won one, they didn't back it up. They were viewed sort of as a temporary one-time champion. Yeah, this league it puts real burdens on you. And maybe that was created by what the Patriots have done in football as well, or going back to the Mr. October Yankees with Reggie Jackson. Sports, all of a sudden, one is not enough. One can be fluke eyes. That's what people did with the Heat's championship in 2006, with the Mavericks title in 2011. Can you back it up? I think Giannis has that sort of feeling and respect for the game that he realizes it's if you can back it up. That's what moves him into the talk with Tim Duncan, with a David Robinson, with those other big men.
And by the way, guys, we have directions we want to go on this thing, but we want to keep this show yours. So I'm going to the comments section and answering whatever you've got. Ira, Sean, and I have our direction, but you guys take us wherever you want us to go. Mad Max, the pressure's on the Heat now. The Finns failed us. Yeah, and I don't know that the Heat feel the pressure of like every other team is failing, although the Panthers certainly aren't. Right. I think it's more they have an internal pressure. They have an internal edge, especially after what happened last year. But from a fan perspective, I can definitely see that.
And also, Clay, I want to add on one thing because they talked about them having new players. Just about every player they added has an edge also.
Yes.
I just posted a story at sunsentinel.com about PJ Tucker, who is still seething that he is the only rotation player from last season Bucks who was not invited back for a commensurate contract. He has his edge. Kyle Lowry, the man has never played a single NBA game without an edge. That guy is, he exemplifies feisty. So he has his edge. Markieff Morris, less than just about a calendar year ago, was helping the Lakers win a championship. They unceremoniously dumped him to the point he's playing for a minimum salary for the Heat. So even the Heat, the players who weren't here to go through that humiliation against the Bucks, they also have their individual edges. So everyone on this roster is incentivized to do more, to give more, to deliver more, and to bring more.
I saw all I needed to see with Kyle Lowry when he got a technical in the preseason. Like that's
technical,
it.
took a charge, almost got a flagrant foul. The man is crazy.
Dwayne Wade said this about Jimmy Butler. He said Jimmy Butler is crazy, but his crazy matches Pat Riley's crazy, matches Eric Spoelstra's crazy, and that's the kind of crazy that Kyle Lowry is. So it works out perfectly. Thomas, it's so enjoyable watching the Heat every game because they're going to play with passion and effort, which is embedded in their DNA. Yes, and yet I will say this. Whether it was mileage, exhaustion, just being over it, last year's Heat team didn't feel like previous Heat teams. I feel like this year's Heat team
was so unique with COVID.
No, I agree.
And Jimmy 20 games with COVID. Tyler Hero never had a transition from his freshman to a sophomore NBA season. There was so much unusual. And Clay, the one thing we have to take a step back now and also realize this is another COVID season. Al Horford is not available for the Boston Celtics for their opening game. We don't know about Jaylen Brown. COVID is a factor. You look down that NBA injury list, there's a bunch of players who have been or still are listed as health and safety protocol. That can torpedo it again. If Jimmy Butler misses, I don't think it'll be 20, but even 10 in a row. If Kyle Lowry has a health and safety protocol moment, we know the Heat are a vaccinated team. We know that gets you back to the court sooner, but so are the Celtics. And still, they wound up losing guys for considerable time in the preseason. Could happen again. So we're still sort of in this not normal, but now we're playing the normal 82 games. So the wear is going to be there. The pressure of a full season is there, but we're still sort of in this COVID. Well, not sort of. We're still in the COVID environment.
No, for sure. I was more saying last year it was, you could tell games where the edge wasn't there, and it was completely excusable as to why. I have a feeling this year, even if you do have some of those issues, and I shouldn't even say if, say when, because I think every team is going to deal with this on some level. I think the quick turnaround from the end of the bubble season to what happened last year, especially for the Lakers and the Heat, you saw it took its toll. Each of the 4 teams that made the conference finals all had immense injury issues as the year went on. I feel like you're going to have a team that's rejuvenated this year and playing more to the level that Thomas mentioned. Too extreme, the Bucks may be the defending champs, but in reality, this Heat team, if we stay healthy, the most feared team in the East. I think I get what you're saying. If you tell me feared team among teams that are not right there at among teams other than the Bucks, I get it. But if you were to ask the Brooklyn Nets who they'd rather see in the second round of the playoffs, the Heat or the Bucks. Yeah. I mean, everybody's look. All due respect to the Heat and what they put together, the Bucks are who they are.
And again, you could. Matter of fact, I was on the phone yesterday with Bobby Marks. He picked the Heat to win the championship.
Glad you mentioned that.
He thinks the Heat have the best starting lineup possibly in the NBA. Not sure if I agree, but that's his opinion. But the question is the depth. The question is that you basically have 3 reliable, proven backups in Tyler Hero, Markieff Morris, and Dwayne Dedmon. Then the unknown. That works fantastically in the playoffs when you have no back-to-backs, when you get time off often between series. Again, I've said this going into the season. I will say this now, and I think I'll say it throughout the season. This is a team built more for the playoffs than for the regular season. But to position yourself in the playoffs, you have to have a good regular season. That's what I'm curious about. So I don't know if the Heat are necessarily feared. Clay, my own thought on the NBA is this. You are feared when the other team puts a single name on the marquee. Come see the Lakers and LeBron James. Come see the Bucks and Giannis Antetokounmpo. Come see the Wizards and Bradley Beal. And there's the one guy who can beat you by himself. I don't think the Heat have that player. I know Jimmy Butler had his moments in the bubble. Tyler Hero had his moments. Kyle Lowry had his moments when Toronto won. But I don't think there's any single player singularly on top of the other team's scouting board where they say, if we stop this player, we're going to win that game. It's a lot harder to do it collectively, but that's what the Heat are going to have to do this season.
So some more of the comments that Pat Riley had yesterday, and this kind of feeds into what you just said. He mentioned about Bam Adebayo that you could see him become a real scorer this year. I thought that was really interesting, and I think this is coming not just because of the work that Bam put in, but I think it goes back to what Kyle Lowry told us in his first question and answer session after he signed with the Heat. Kyle Lowry said, my job is to make Bam Adebayo think that he's Superman. And I asked Bam about that, and I asked Kyle Lowry about that. And Kyle said, I need to get him the ball in spots where he can do what he does best. That's not saying I need to make Bam think that he's Superman playing defense. I need to make Bam think that he's Superman as the point center. And how Bam answered me was, he kind of laughed, but the one thing he said that stood out to me was, I don't have to be the point guard anymore. I mean, this goes back to what we said about what Pat Riley said at the end of last year, which is at some point you can't just keep putting stuff on guys' plates because it doesn't allow them to be elite at what they do best. Just because Bam Adebayo may be the second best point guard, quote unquote, among centers in the NBA behind Nikola Jokic doesn't mean that's what makes him the best. So I think what you're going to see, and I'm really interested to watch how this plays out on Thursday night. Do you see Bam Adebayo more as a scorer than what we're used to seeing? Because it certainly seems like Pat Riley was saying.
He'll have opportunities, and so will Jimmy, because they have the definitive playmaker who's going to set them up a little bit more. Goran Dragic has always been primarily a scorer because in Slovenia, that's what he had to be. That was the mentality in other places. The one thing I will say about Pat Riley's comment about Bam, if you're the person who signed off on the 5-year, $174 million extension, you damn well better say this guy's a superstar. Can you imagine if you're Mickey Arison, whether he's still in the Caribbean or Mediterranean, or even watching that press conference yesterday, he goes, yeah, I think Bam's okay. He'll be good. And you're like, wait a minute. You just gave this guy $174 million. Why do you think he's good or okay? Or he's a complimentary player? That's a lot of money. So, yeah, I know I said this last year when people are talking about Bam's uneven play. I said, look, folks, he's still on the last year of his rookie scale contract. So the play is certainly more than commensurate with the salary. Well, there's a pressure there right now. There's a pressure on Jimmy Butler for his extension that brings him to a $220 million total contract. There's a pressure on Kyle Lowry at 3 years at $85 million. Pat Riley signed a lot of really impressive checks in the offseason. These guys have to be good to great because they're being paid to be good to great. I know we're not supposed to equate the money with performance, but in a salary cap league, you have no other choice. Because the Heat are so top heavy with those three contracts, maybe even Duncan Robinson, it does put them in a little bit of a deficit with the supporting players. So if Pat Riley thinks that Bam's going to have a phenomenal or fantastic year, then I'm saying that's merely par for the course of the salary that he's earning. The Heat made that investment. Now the investment has to pay off.
All right, coming up, I want to get into another player who I think is really going to benefit from having Kyle Lowry on this roster. And then I also want to talk more about the upcoming games, plus get some more of your comments. That's right here on Inside the Paint. Welcome back to home stretch here on Inside the Paint. Clay Ferraro here, Ira Winderman there, Sean Stanley keeping us on the air. Got a big day ahead, too. The Miami Heat are going to practice a little bit later on today, ahead of tomorrow night's season opener against the Milwaukee Bucks, which we've talked about a lot as this show has gone on. And, we're going to get to some of your comments as we close out the show here. I mentioned before the break somebody else who I think is really going to benefit from Kyle Lowry, even if he doesn't play a lot of minutes with him, and that's Tyler Hero. And Pat Riley said yesterday that he kind of prefers if young players go out and do what they're going to do before telling everybody what they're going to do. And
Right.
I understand that perspective. And yet, the world has changed a bit. And I do feel like Tyler Hero is somebody who is the rare player who thrives in those sorts of situations when he either puts pressure on himself, like he did when he decommitted from Wisconsin, ended up going to Kentucky. I think he's the type of guy that can benefit from that. You get somebody like Kyle Lowry in there, and number one, when he's on the floor with Kyle Lowry, he can focus on strictly scoring. And number two, I feel as though, much like with Bam Adebayo, Tyler Hero was somebody who was asked to do a little too much last year. You asked him to be kind of that de facto point guard at times. That was not his role. It's not something that can he do it? Can he handle the ball? Sure. I still think this team is lacking a backup point guard. And yes. I think that's somewhere where, David Aldridge reported yesterday. Didn't report. He kind of speculated.
Yeah.
But when you're David Aldridge and you have the ties to Washington that he does,
Good point.
And he speculated that John Wall could end up being bought out and coming to Miami. But if you're Tyler Hero and you're going to have to play some of that de facto point guard role with that backup unit, there's so much that you can learn from watching somebody like Kyle Lowry. So, Ira, what did you make of Pat Riley's comments about Tyler Hero, and how do you see kind of the evolution of his game, not just as a scorer, but also as being able to watch somebody like a Lowry and learn from him?
It's interesting. I think Pat responded more to what people were saying about Tyler than what Tyler basically did on social media. In other words, I think Pat sort of spoke about the wave that came at Tyler and told everyone, hey, sort of, chill out. He can still be a player. I'm not worried about the other stuff, although maybe you want to sort of become that player first. That's what I spoke about last year when I was on another form of the show, just saying, hey, if you're going to put yourself out there with this breakfast cereal, with the Chipotle bowl and all that, and announce you're here, you better be there. And he had an uneven season, and he sort of paid for that with a degree of criticism. But I still have the concern with the lack of a point guard for this reason. Tyler did more handling than I thought he would in the preseason. He actually did it very well. He surprised me. So I backed off my question marks about whether he could be a playmaker. But I still don't think that's his primary role. Right now, it looks like the Heat are going to try to stagger, that they're going to take Kyle Lowry out early. Jimmy Butler will take care of the handling. Then Jimmy will go out. Kyle will come back at the end of the first quarter. He'll handle and be one of the two. But there will be injuries. There might be COVID. There could be foul trouble. And it does seem like Tyler Hero right now is slotted in as the next ball handler. I really think that it's not by coincidence Pat mentioned Bam Adebayo not being as much of a playmaker. I believe it's organizational. That, again, like I spoke in the previous segment here on Pallet Rack City's Inside the Paint, that when you give the kind of money to Bam, you need him to be more of a center. You need him to be more of a scorer. You want him to do that. So they've taken that off his plate. Again, if they had another point guard, as a matter of fact, I spoke to Gabe Vincent about his role. And a lot of people have mentioned this. John Crotty mentioned this. Gabe has been a much better shooter off the ball. You get different shots when you're off the ball. He was a great shooter in the G League. He was a really good shooter in college. But now he's taking shots as the playmaker. And he told me, what I like is that when I'm in the game with Tyler, he can handle as well. So again, even your backup point guard is saying that Tyler's going to do some handling. I really wish they had another point guard. I mentioned their situation against the salary cap when I mentioned the luxury tax today, and I asked Pat Riley about that. They can't afford another player now unless they make another trade or another move. I'd like to have one more point guard here because there will be games. Clay, matter of fact, I'm going to throw this back at you. Kyle Lowry is out for game X. Let's even say next week. They have a back-to-back. They play Charlotte at home on Friday. They're at Memphis on Saturday. Got a bunch of travel involved there. And let's say Eric Spoelstra says, you know what? Not going to push it with my 35-year-old point guard. He's going to sit out. I don't need him going against Ja Morant. Who are you starting at point guard? Who are you moving into the starting lineup? That's the question. And if you move Tyler in there, he still is more of a ball handler. That's going to happen. I think it could happen. We'll get to next week's games after next Wednesday's show. But I do even think that first back-to-back is going to be a little bit of a litmus test. I think we're going to look, okay, there's not a lot of back-to-backs this year. I think the Heat only have 9 that involve travel. There's a back-to-back in LA against the 2 LA teams. There's a bunch of home back-to-backs where they don't travel. But that is a travel back-to-back. And you have a game against Dallas after that. So if you do load manage, rest, whatever you want to call it on a player, all of a sudden Tyler's being asked to do more. Just like we said in the previous segment with Bam, when you add more to a player's plate, they can't be great in specific area A, B, and C because they're also having to deal with X, Y, and Z. It's an imperfect roster right now.
Jack of all trades, master of none.
Yes.
And I think that's the issue when you try to make Bam Adebayo do too much. And that's why I don't think it's a coincidence that Pat Riley mentioned scoring specifically with him. And the thing with Tyler, and you ask who would be the de facto point guard if Kyle Lowry would have got. So I think it may be Gabe Vincent, and he wouldn't handle the ball as much. I think, unfortunately, you would probably have to have Jimmy Butler go back to some of the primary playmaking
and you
role.
take away something of him. We spoke about just as Bam gets more offense, Jimmy can look at the rim a little bit more. So again, it's an imperfect roster. I still don't know how I understand how they got in this position with the luxury tax. And while I wasn't baiting Pat Riley, I do understand with the repeater tax, Clay. I mean, you can understand this. You now have the huge contracts of Bam Adebayo, Kyle Lowry, and Jimmy Butler, a reasonably large contract of Duncan Robinson. This offseason, you were going to add one more huge contract. Either Victor Oladipo comes back and is great, boom, $30 million, or Tyler Hero is great this season, boom, $170 million extension. You're going to have 5 huge contracts. Mm-hmm. You're going to be in the luxury tax. You're going to be on the repeater clock next season, so I can understand not this season. But I wish the roster was different for this reason. Again, this is something we've mentioned before. 14 standard players, standard contracts on the roster, one short of the NBA maximum. But Udonis Haslem doesn't play. For the start of the season, Victor Oladipo won't play. You can make an argument whether KZ Okpala can play. So you basically have only 11 components of that standard roster who are playing. I think the Heat are making it hard on themselves. I understand the luxury tax. I wrote about it at sunsentinel.com today and in the paper in your doorstep. But still, I can understand why they're doing it against the tax, but it does make it harder.
Quick hello to Dougie Fresh, Rich, Andreas, Ron, Omar. Thanks for hanging out with us. Let's see. Thomas, really looking forward to how Spoelstra figures out the rotations. Ronnie, and I like this. In the past, the Heat had skilled big men on their way to previous championships like Shaq and Chris Bosh. Does Bam need to play at that level for a championship run? Yes. Yes, he has to. And I think, that's what they're banking on, and that's why you pay him. Yes. To your point about the luxury tax, I think the thing that Riley kind of alluded to yesterday, and we've seen with Heat teams in the past, is if we feel like we have a legitimate championship team, not just a team that can challenge, but a championship team, they are willing to do whatever is necessary. I feel like if you get to a certain point in this season and you're looking at how this is playing out and you're seeing a dynamic, dangerous team when they're fully healthy, but a team that takes a step back, when you have to rest a Kyle Lowry, that's when I think you may make a move and you may say, you know what? Forget it. If John Wall comes available on the buyout market, I love the fit of a John Wall as a backup.
And they'll have more money, Clay, under the tax later when it's only a prorated portion.
Point.
Like right now, they're $400,000 under the tax. That could change a little bit, but $400,000 under the tax on a minimum scale salary, you could probably at least the final third of the season add another player without any other moves and stay under the tax, which is perfect because the buyout deadline is March 1st. And Houston really has very little incentive to buy out John Wall ahead of time when there's an outside chance they could use him in a trade to balance a trade. So you're probably talking later rather than sooner with that kind of addition anyway.
So the final few minutes of this show, let's get to the games coming up this week. We already talked about the Bucks game a lot. I just think the dynamic of that game changes if Drew Holiday does not play. He had the heel contusion last night. My guess is, Ira, they won't chance that this early in the season. I mean, I'm no doctor, but I'm going to play one on Inside the Paint.
I agree.
I can't imagine that they're going to chance that. Then they have to go to Indiana. And this is a game that I think is going to be a really nice litmus test for some of the new additions, especially in the front court. And by new additions, I'm not just talking about PJ Tucker and Markieff Morris, but hey, I want to see how Bam Adebayo with the added bulk. How do these guys do against that front line?
Miles Turner, Domantas Sabonis.
And no Karis LeVert for Indiana.
Or TJ Warren.
And TJ Warren's out as well.
So he's working his way back. Here's the thing about Indiana. And again, you talk about when you get a team and how beneficial it is versus late. Just like we didn't know Kyrie was going to be out the whole season, but we knew he wasn't going to be playing in Brooklyn. I think Indiana is severely underrated for this reason. If I told you I had a team with a starting lineup of Miles Turner, Domantas Sabonis, TJ Warren, Karis LeVert, and Malcolm Brogdon, that's a really good starting lineup.
It is.
And yet people either have Indiana in the play-in group or out of the playoffs in the East. I think people are sleeping on Indiana. Plus, you have the coaching of Rick Carlisle, which one is he's a quality coach anyway, but two, the new coach thing usually motivates a team to step forward a little bit more. So I'm glad they're getting Indiana earlier rather than later. I think that could make a difference. I think Indiana's going to be really good. I think Indiana is going to be an overachiever in the Eastern Conference. I sort of don't know and don't get it. I think Indiana's better than New York. The starting lineup I just gave you.
I agree.
Of LeVert and Warren and Sabonis and Turner and Brogdon, I think is better than any first five the Knicks can throw out there. So I think people are sleeping on Indiana. It'll be a road game. Obviously, there'll be the early season home crowd in Indiana. So it'll be interesting. Temperatures in the 40s. The Heat will have to deal with the first sort of cold weather trip already. So again, another reason you want to get that Milwaukee game at home to give yourself sort of a little bit of time there to work into your road schedule.
And it will be the second night of a back-to-back for Indiana, so maybe that ends up helping you out. But I'm glad you made that point about the Knicks. I feel like the Knicks showed us who they were in the postseason last year. I feel like that's a team that is a try-hard team, and yet when push comes to shove, the talent level is not quite there. Now, maybe a healthy Kemba Walker changes that, but we'll see.
Sure.
And then the final game that we're gonna have before we see you guys again here on Inside the Paint, just chalk it up as a loss because they're playing the Orlando Magic.
No, but there's no Fournier.
Points.
But think about it. There's no Fournier. There's no Vucevic.
No Vuce,
the reason the Heat always lost to basically lottery Orlando teams is Nikola Vucevic. I mean, we're going back to the Hassan Whiteside days. Would put up a 30-18 against the Heat always.
Oh,
he was a terror. And if he wasn't, it was that damn Fournier would hit some sort of late shot, and kill the Heat with that whole ponytail look of his. They're gone. Completely different Orlando team. Clay, I wanted to say this, especially looking at the Orlando game, not specifically about Orlando. I think the East is very, very deep this season. I think the Heat is deep 1 through, honestly, 12. I think there are 3 teams in the East, Orlando, Detroit, and Cleveland, that are in no way playoff contenders. You cannot lose to them.
Yes.
This is what always marred the Heat, whether it was Detroit lost to Detroit last year, the loss to Orlando. You can't have those in your ledger. Every other game, and I'm including Washington and Chicago in there, are going to be tough this season. You can't let these slip away. Any loss this season for the Miami Heat to Orlando, Cleveland, or Detroit is inexcusable. And that starts on Monday. So I don't want to see any Heat players bringing in excuse notes on Tuesday to practice of why they lost to the Orlando Magic. You can't have it. This is going to be standings at the end of the year, just like last year, where I believe a single game could determine a seeding. If the Heat had one more win last season, especially against the Hawks, they could have been the number 4 seed, home court in the first round, not playing Milwaukee.
By the way, a Hawks team that was massively depleted. I mean, that game was the most maddening of the entire season. But no, to your point, got to win those games, and that's why I think somebody like Kyle Lowry is going to make such a big difference. You got that guy going out there yelling at referees against Charlotte in the preseason. You can't tell me that he's not going to bring that type of intensity even against Orlando in the regular season. All right, speaking of intensity, Ira always brings it every Wednesday. I do the best to bring it as well. But, hey, we appreciate you guys hanging out with us. Thanks so much for the comments. We're going to get to more of them next week as well. So, hey, enjoy the basketball. It tips off tomorrow night.
We'll talk about real games next week.
All right, guys, thanks for hanging out here on Inside the Paint.